Taiwan marks 78 years since the 228 incident, with President Liao promising to seek the perpetrators. The trade war is set to begin with the latest tariff announcement from U.S. President Donald Trump. Outcry across the globe as Thailand deports 40 Uyghurs to China. Plus, a record low birth rate and rapidly aging population has Japan reaching out for a helping hand. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Liao. 2025 marks the 78th anniversary of the 228 incident, a painful day for many in Taiwan who lost family members in the violent government crackdown. Tiffany Wong spoke with some of the victims' families who came from the U.S., Japan, and Taiwan to remember their loved ones.
Pain still etched raw decades later. Families remember their loved ones 78 years after a brutal crackdown by the Chinese nationalist Kuomintang beginning on February 28, 1947, now known as the 228 incident. Some estimate that over 20,000 people were killed in the weeks that followed. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te addressed the victims' families for the first time since taking office, saying his government would aim to see the perpetrators of the incident held responsible.
目前台湾社会也佫有声音，为何只有受害者并无加害者？受害真相为何悠然不明？这款的代志，除了无法度完全告慰受难者以及家属，社会嘛无法度得到真正的和解。
The 228 incident was a prelude to decades of state violence that followed. 38 years of martial law known as the White Terror. During that time, 228 became a forbidden topic. Discussing it could land you in prison. It wasn't until much later, the 1990s, when Taiwan became a democracy, that the government began to acknowledge the suffering of the victims. February 28th was made a national holiday. And now, people come from near and far to commemorate loved ones lost in the violence. People like 19-year-old Megan Huang, who came with her family from the U.S. to honor her great-grandfather.
Because we didn't really know much about the event and kind of the details and the truth of what happened. So this whole trip was very eye-opening to learning about family history and I guess just learning about what happened.
81-year-old Aoyama Keisho lost his father when he was just 3 years old during the incident, the only known Japanese victim. He comes back every year from Okinawa to pay respects to his father.
台湾の人々も3万人近くの方々が犠牲になってとても悲しい事件。やはり日本の私もやはり同じような気持ちで台湾の人々の犠牲者家族と一緒になって弔いたいと思っています。 今では私の孫も連れてきます。孫にも絶対伝えていきたいと思っています。
But even now, many believe the wrongs of the past still haven't been fully addressed. No one has been punished for their role in 228, and the Kuomintang remains a powerful political force in Taiwan.
国民政府说他是暴民，他当头子，现场被枪毙。以前都是国民政府都不来了。 时代有在改变的，台湾人也可以做总统啊，所以才会来。
Here at the National 228 Memorial Museum, the long silent suffering of the victims is finally given voice. It's a space to honor them, to mourn them, and to educate the next generation so their lives are not forgotten. Alex Chen and Tiffany Wong in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Every year ahead of 228 Memorial Day, one activist in Taipei honors his brother's legacy of advocating for transitional justice. Wesley Lewis has the story.
For nearly a decade, 71-year-old Zheng Qinghua has been leading this annual march to commemorate what's known in Taiwan as the 228 incident. an anti-government uprising on February 28, 1947, and its subsequent violent crackdown. He's taken up the baton from his late older brother Zheng Nanrong, a well-known activist who organized some of the country's first 228 memorial events back in 1987, which were largely met with police suppression.
1987年，郑南榕他坚持穿西装，走在这个街头上，等于一种抗议的作为。然后他说，如果我被视为暴民，我也要很有尊严的表现出我这个暴民的这个身份出来啊，这是他所坚持。因此，我们这个行动呢，都希望能够的话，至少穿黑色服装。那如果穿西装更好。
The bloody government crackdown of the uprising on February 28, 1947, saw thousands of protesters killed and triggered mistrust, resentment, and intense socio-political divisions within Taiwanese society for years to come. This was when the Republic of China government, led by the Kuomintang, was trying to consolidate its rule over Taiwan. It was followed by a 38-year period of martial law and what's known as the White Terror, an era characterized by the political repression of dissent.
Now almost 80 years after the 228 incident, the victims of state violence are honored here at the 228 Peace Memorial Park. Established in 1996, it stands in the heart of Taipei, and it's one of the stops for this year's commemorative march.
After Taiwan became a democracy in the 1990s, the government began to acknowledge the harm caused by the 228 incident. But activists here say it's important, now more than ever, to keep fighting to memorialize the event. They point to recent sweeping government budget cuts, to governmental human rights offices as a threat to advocacy work, a concern shared by political scholars.
So National Human Rights Commission is responsible for promoting the human rights issues, human rights education, and also the international connections. But it's stashed for more than 90% of its budget. So its capacity to promote education and for the victims, memorial events are highly limited right now.
Which is why for these demonstrators holding vigil in Taipei, it's important to show up like this every year, to exercise their hard-fought right to mark this painful chapter in the country's history, and continue the fight for transitional justice. A fight that is deeply personal for someone like Zheng Qinghua, who is determined to keep speaking truth to power, advocating for awareness of an event that still shapes contemporary Taiwanese society. Howard Jong and Wesley Lewis for TaiwanPlus.
To mark Peace Memorial Day, a local magazine has organized an English-language walking tour of some of the key locations related to the February 28 incident. Rick Liao reports on how organizers hope for more awareness of key events on Taiwan's difficult road to democracy.
It's on this street in central Taipei that in 1947, an altercation between a cigarette seller and a government official sparked deadly protests that led to a countrywide uprising against the Chinese nationalist government here in Taiwan. That protest became known as the February 28 incident, and it was violently suppressed by the government. It ushered in decades of state violence and political oppression here in Taiwan. Now, a local activist and journalist hopes to keep memory of that incident alive and share the lessons of February 28 with as wide an audience as possible, with this new English language walking tour of some of the important sites from that day.
I think that memory is something that needs to be kept alive because it is something that happened 78 years ago. Anyone who is alive then experienced it is quite old now if they are still alive. And so there's a need for the younger generation to keep this memory alive. And in the meantime, there are also those that would try to erase this memory, that they hope people forget about it.
February 28 is now Peace Memorial Day here in Taiwan, a chance to remember and reflect on the tens of thousands of people that died or suffered at the hands of Taiwan's authoritarian government. Taiwan is now a vibrant democracy, but organizers hope that through events like this, people will continue to remember the incident of February 28 and to not take today's freedom for granted. Chris Ma and Rick Liao in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a new 10% tariff on Chinese goods and says a previously announced 25% duty on imports from Canada and Mexico will go into effect next Tuesday. It's the latest sign of escalating trade fights. Louise Watt reports.
After 2 weeks of relative calm on the tariff front, another bombshell from US President Donald Trump. He says duties of 25% are going ahead on Canada and Mexico. And he's doubling his 10% tariff on imports from China.
10% tariffs has already been implemented on China. Are you planning to do an
additional 10 above the 10?
This will be an additional 10 above. And is there, from the talks with Canada and Mexico so far, are you not seeing the progress that you wanted in order to
I don't see it at all. No, not on drugs.
Trump says the tariffs are about fentanyl, blaming Canada and Mexico for not stopping the flow of the opioid across their borders. His announcement came as Mexican officials were in Washington to try to prevent the tariffs from going ahead. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said they were doing all they could to stop the tariffs too, and denied that the source of the US's fentanyl problem was Canada.
If on Tuesday there are unjustified tariffs brought in on Canada, we will have an immediate and extremely strong response, as Canadians expect.
While Trump initially paused the tariffs on his two neighbors, extra duties of 10% on Chinese goods are already in effect. Beijing responded to those with its own relatively muted tariffs, perhaps hoping to negotiate them away. China's Commerce Ministry says the two sides should talk through their trade differences.
中方坚决反对美方单边关税措施，坚定维护自身合法正当权益，也愿通过对话协商来解决问题。
Beijing could push back harder this time. Many economists say Trump's tariffs will mean American consumers end up paying more. And Mexico, China and Canada are the US's top 3 trading partners, accounting for more than 40% of its imports. But tariffs are set to be a defining feature of Trump's presidency. He's also threatening to put them on the European Union. But after a meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, he suggested tariffs might not be necessary on that country, instead raising the prospect of a US-UK trade deal. Welcome news for Britain's Brexit-battered economy.
We're going to have a great trade agreement. One way or the other, we're going to end up with a very good trade agreement for both countries. And we're working on that as we speak.
Under Trump, deals and tariffs are now part of the diplomatic back and forth. He believes tariffs will help grow the US economy. His trading partners hope they can appease him through talks or threats of retaliatory tariffs. None of them want a trade war, but all of them are having to scramble to avoid one. Dolphine Chen and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Washington, D.C. to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. They're discussing a deal on critical minerals, including rare earth metals, which are key to high-end electronics and the global economy. For more on this, our reporter Jaime Ocon spoke to Tin Mak. He's a security analyst and editor of The Counteroffensive, a news publication based in Ukraine.
So it looks like President Donald Trump and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, they're in talks for a deal that could allow access to Ukraine's natural deposits of these rare earth critical minerals that are used for a bunch of stuff, military systems, electronics. Why is that important for the United States?
Well, it's becoming increasingly clear, and even if people aren't saying it out loud, that we're entering this new period in geopolitics where our trade and our supply chains are going to be increasingly bifurcated, split apart between a democratic world and an authoritarian one, right? That's the subtext for every conversation you will hear about critical minerals, is how do we get some of these important materials and how do we prevent them from getting what it is that we want. That there's a limited amount of lithium in the world. Well, we need lithium to build batteries. Batteries obviously are going to be absolutely important in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. How do we get our supply of lithium and deny our adversaries their supply of lithium? For example, there's lithium in Ukraine, and that's why they're having conversations about how is it that we as the United States secure a steady flow of lithium and prevent our adversaries from getting the same.
You know, we see the United States really wants to strike a deal for these critical minerals. Is that an opportunity for Ukraine to maybe leverage its position and get maybe something that it wants?
It's clear that that Donald Trump wants to be able to look at this deal with Ukraine and say the United States got something substantial out of our commitment to Ukraine, right? That the Biden administration had operated based on values, that we need to protect Ukraine because it's the right thing to do as a fellow democracy to protect them against an authoritarian dictator, and that it makes the world safer as a result when we follow our values. But Donald Trump's administration is based on transaction and extraction. So being able to pull something out and get something in return for what it is that the United States does. That's really the way that Trump views the world, and that's the way he's viewing this critical minerals deal and the whole set of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia to hopefully end the war.
You know, when we look at these critical minerals, and a lot are used for these very advanced weapon systems, for a country like Taiwan that has placed, you know, dozens of orders for U.S. weapons, and other countries around the world that are also looking to build up their arms, how is that going to affect that arms race?
Well, the more you want something and the less available it is, it's going to drive the price up. And also, as we saw during the COVID pandemic, the more people want something and there's a sudden shock to the system, as I think the Ukraine war is, I think Trump's election to the presidency is, there's a shock to the system, and everyone suddenly is rethinking their defense posture, and as well as what kind of technology we're purchasing, how much we should purchase. For example, Europe is going to likely dramatically increase its spending on defense over the coming years. That's going to cause prices for weaponry, tanks, armored vehicles, drones. Those are all going to increase in price as people all try to scramble to get the same things. And so there is a real shock to the system right now, and we should all be prepared for that.
That was Tim Mack, editor of The Counteroffensive, a security news outlet based in Kyiv. The Education Ministry says it will restrict exchanges between Taiwan's academic institutions and 7 military-linked universities in China. The ministry says those universities have aided China's military in weapons development and act on behalf of Beijing's influence operations under its United Front Work Department. The U.S. blacklisted 18 Chinese universities in 2020, including the 7 Taiwan restricted, citing threats to national security. North Korean state media has released photos of leader Kim Jong-un supervising the test launch of strategic cruise missiles. The drill was conducted earlier this week to show off the country's ability to counter a nuclear attack. It comes days after Pyongyang vowed to respond to what it called escalating hostilities led by the U.S. This is the 4th missile test this year and the 2nd since U.S. President Donald Trump took office. Thailand has sent at least 40 Uyghurs back to China. That's despite warnings from the United Nations and rights groups that they're at risk of poor treatment and even torture. But Bangkok says it's been assured they will be treated well. Joyce Tseng has more.
Landing in China from Thailand, this man is one of dozens of Uyghurs deported by Bangkok on an unscheduled flight after a decade in detention, seen here in a video shared by the Thai government. The recorded moment, a stark contrast to condemnations from the international community, who warned that sending the Uyghurs back to China would put their lives in danger.
Their deportation violates the principle of non-refoulement, for which there is a complete prohibition in cases where there is a real risk of torture, ill treatment, or other irreparable harm upon their return.
Bangkok says it's repatriated the Uyghurs after no third country came forward to take them, and after Beijing gave assurances they would be well looked after. The men had been held in the Southeast Asian country for a decade, arrested for entering without a visa. They'd fled from China's Xinjiang region. Some have died in custody over the years, but there are fears their fate won't be better in China. Rights groups have long accused Beijing of abusing and committing genocide against the mainly Muslim ethnic minority, claims Beijing vehemently denies. Bangkok's move to deport now also condemned by its long-standing ally, the United States, which has been criticized for the way it's conducting its own deportations of undocumented migrants. In a statement, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Thailand risks running afoul of its international obligations and urged the country to verify that the men's rights are protected. In recent weeks, Bangkok has been working closely with Beijing, cracking down on transnational scam centers in areas near the Thai-Myanmar border. Thailand has also been trying to attract Chinese tourists to visit the country, a crucial source of its GDP. All factors that have raised eyebrows around the Uyghurs' deportation.
Clearly, the Thai government, it seems that Beijing has been putting a lot of pressure on Thailand for the return of these men, but the way in which this occurred, in the dead of night, with no information provided, no information to diplomats, to the UN, to human rights organizations who have repeatedly been asking the Thai government questions about the fate of these men, is really unacceptable. And I think, the Thai government is a member of the UN Human Rights Council. It makes a mockery of its membership of the Human Rights Council.
Rights groups are urging Thailand not to send back the remaining Uyghurs in Thai custody to China. They're also turning their attention to Beijing to demand authorities disclose the whereabouts of these men and verify their safety. Joseph Wu and Joyce Zhen for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan just had its worst air pollution of the year. On Thursday, pollution levels hit hazardous levels across the country, and you could see a thick haze hanging over Taipei. In response, the Environment Ministry stepped in, setting up a central command center for the first time in 3 years. Officials say the bad air is likely to stick around through the weekend, but should start clearing up by Sunday. Japan's birth rate has hit a record low after falling for 9 consecutive years. With fewer young people to support the country's rapidly aging population, Japan's senior care industry is turning to robots for a solution. Rosie Greninger reports.
This robotic helping hand, developed with artificial intelligence, is designed to care for people in Japan. As the country grapples with an aging population, researchers at Waseda University created the humanoid robot called Eric in the hope it will be the future of senior care.
やはりこれから高齢社会、もう超高齢社会になってますし、少子化ですし、そういう中でロボットの支援というものが日常生活でもあるいは医療福祉の現場でも必要になってきます。
A combination of long life expectancy and low birth rates means Japan is the world's second most advanced aging nation, and the issue is only becoming worse. The number of babies born in Japan fell for a 9th consecutive year in 2024 to a record low of just over 720,000, according to government data. Over the next decade, the number of people aged 15 to 64 is projected to fall over 9%, while people aged 65 and over are expected to make up over 34% of the population by 2040. The dwindling working age population is causing a severe shortage of workers and forcing the elderly care industry to look into other options.
高齢化率ってのはどんどん上がっていきますから、今よりさらに厳しいバランスになりますので、そこまではですね、なかなか今の技術だけでは難しいかもしれませんが、まずは当面はその様々な技術を活用して現状のオペレーションを少しリバイスするというか改善していくことによって、まず2040年まで道筋を作ろうと。
Researchers worldwide have been trying to develop humanoid robots, but Eric is special. That's because of its ability to make physical contact with humans and respond to their movements. The project is funded through a government program designed to support disruptive innovation to address difficult social problems. The robot is capable of putting socks on a person, helping them sit up, and changing diapers, as well as many other household jobs, including cooking food and folding laundry. But the technology is not yet mature when it comes to interacting with people and supporting them emotionally.
一つちょっと懸念としては、やはり皆さん利用者人で介護の提供者も人であって、人と人との関わりの中の温かみであったりだとか、あとは例えば空気を読むであったりだとか、コミュニケーションの部分が再現できるのかなっていうふうなちょっと不安はあります。
But the lead researcher behind ERIC is adamant that with decades more research, it will be capable of these type of functions by 2040 and widely used for even more difficult tasks in later years.
2050年にはもう何でもできるロボットというのを実は描いています。本当に医療の現場でもお医者さんと一緒に手術ができるとかですね。で福祉施設でももうロボットが単独であるいは介護士の方と一緒に作業ができるという究極のもうロボットと人が共生するそういう社会を描いています。
Although aged care residents are more hesitant.
人間じゃなくってロボットがやってくれるっていう。どう思う？ちょっとまだ早い。
But with an already chronic labour shortage across Japan only set to get worse, days where robots work alongside human caregivers are certain to come. Howard Chang and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
And thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally today, take a look at these highlights from the runways of Milan Fashion Week. I'm Liao. Take care and see you next time.